Welcome to the Gulf Conversations. Leo itakuwa moto kidogo. Niko na wazito hapa. Kuna Nyamori pale, advocate of the High Court. We also have physical planners in the house, Mr. Maxwell. Tuko na Dennis Nyakach. As usual, Mbogi. Huyo ni Mbogi wetu wa kawaida. John Odenyo is also here. And George Abwajo. Ni watu wetu wa kawaida hapa. Director Gulf Hub. Na mimi wenyu. Now, today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic. This is about housing. Then a number of notices that have been passed around. I guess some of you have also heard or seen some of these notices. The current acting city manager, Abala Wanga, put out a notice for Kisumu County on issues housing and estates. There was also another notice in regards to burial places in Kisumu and them not being wanted or needed within cities and the suburbs. Now, I want to make this thing as simple as possible. Nyamori, Odenyo, Maxwell, mukisikia housing Kisumu, housing na land in Kisumu, where are we as at now? I know this is a very, how do I call it? It's a very tight topic that brings out a lot of reactions. But I think it's important that we understand where we are at in terms of housing in Kisumu County in relation to, are we doing good or not? Just a general overview of where we are at. Yes.
My take is, yes, we have city status currently. Yes, yes, I believe, looking at, from my knowledge point, I believe when I talk about housing first, in terms of the number of houses or the number of spaces that people can live in, I would want to believe that at the moment we may not be doing well vis-a-vis the prices of the units that are available. They are slightly above the market rates, so we would do with the number, whether there are more increased private investments or public-led investments. It would kind of try and be at equilibrium, because every single day there are new people new people coming to town. In regards to the notice or the city houses, I mean, those are our sisters, those are our brothers. My concern is yeah.
General overview.
General overview. I think Kisumu would do with extra investments. Whether initiated by the private sector or public sector, we need new housing, and the city also grows. Because I think we've all read the draft city plan, shows that there are some identified growth nodes. Coupled with the report that by 2050, I think over a huge percentage shall be living in cities. Now, Kisumu is considered one of the biggest cities. So to be ready for that, yes, there needs to be increased investments in housing. So, but relatively, I think our rent prices are slightly above rates. I don't know, I think our experts may tell us the ratio of the number of people living in the houses that they own vis-a-vis those people living in rented houses. I think the discussion may be guided by a bit of that information if given to us.
What I want to say about the general overview of the housing status in Kisumu city and county is that yes, we need houses, we need lots of units, but the approach that the city should take, because we need to distinguish between the city and the county, and I reside within the city, and so the city management should be concerned with me and those living within the city. But we need houses constructed or built that are compliant with constitution and with human rights of tenants and even the landowners. As it were today, if you allow me to go outside Kisumu into the country, we do not have a housing policy that should be able to guide the city or the county in coming up with structures that should house the residents.
And ask, Kisumu is cosmopolitan. Kisumu, yes, there are people who are renting. Then there are also those who are building their own homes. Then there are also those who are coming in, buying homes. Then there are also those who are generally indigenous here. What I want to find out is, given the trajectory that we are in currently, are we doing good in terms of bringing all these different groupings together?
I really want to bring this aspect of like the rights to housing. A 1948 Human Declaration on housing anchors the human rights to affordable housing. And when you look at housing, there are these 7 elements that I want us to look into housing, so that we know, is it really the best housing that we need? Is it the kind of housing that is in Kisumu, or not the kind of housing that is there? Because housing is not just like the 4 walls. Housing also entails the roads, the infrastructure, and the services. So for me, I look at the security of tenure, where someone stays at. Do they have the tenure? Are they secured of that place? Will they be evicted a day after staying in that place? Or what happens when you talk on housing in Kisumu? Do we have these tenants who sign the agreement forms? Or do we have mutual agreements of word of mouth? So that also checks on the security tenure of it. And then, is the house affordable? In affordability, we tend to look into like, don't use 30% of your rent or income in paying the rent. You should use less than 30% of your income to pay the rent. And in paying rent, it means also the electricity bills, water bills, and those other necessities, garbage collection bills. So is it really affordable as such? And then we also look at it in accessibility. Wherever you stay at, wherever you like living, is it accessible? Can you really reach it quite fast and also get out of it? Accessible in terms of all those localities and the needs that you really want to be at that particular point. And then there's this also important key when we consider housing, the cultural adequacy. I know Kisumu, we have these combined persons so different. We have also the Indians and Asians who also have a particular design of houses. And if also we talk of the Luo community, there's a particular way in which they build, such that you don't place your bedroom on the left side of the house, but the main bedroom has to be on the right side of the house. Do the houses in Kisumu? Yes, it's the cultural part of now housing. Will you stay in a house that has the main bedroom to the left side as a Luo, or will you really want those that have it on the right side? So you look at the culture part of it. And then we look also availability of materials. Yes. Materials and infrastructure. How best can we have this? Like, which kind of materials should I use to construct my house to make it affordable? So when you have all these 7 aspects combined into one, now we can say that this person really has a better housing. You can have a permanent house, but then the exterior part of your house is really needs improvement. So we have to look at all these components. But in Kisumu right now, I would say the quantity of houses within Kisumu County as such is within the rural areas. The quality of housing in Kisumu and the quality of services for this housing is within the urban areas. How do we bridge this gap so that also in the rural, we have this quality of housing and quality of services and infrastructure, so that we don't have the other side hanging to this side, so that people move from the rural to come and experience the better housing in the urban.
So what you're saying, layman's language,
is
nyumba mzuri ziko tao.
Nyumba mzuri na zile services nzuri ziko tao. Okay. But kwa wingi wa nyumba, it's within the villages. So most houses are within the villages, the quantity. But now the quality of services and the quality of housing is within the urban setup. Maybe due to the bylaws that are there that restrict the urban areas on what type of building they need to have. So it brings us to this discussion of how best can we use our architectural, should I say vernacular architecture to build houses, because we can't shy away from having mud houses. And Makiu, people go to stay in Mombasa and they stay in these grass-thatched Makuti houses. They pay quite handsome for a 3-day night as compared to the rent that they'll pay in their sort of a brick house. So we also need to look in this discussion.
Yeah, I share in the views that have been expressed, and would want to emphasize the fact that we are a growing city. Just in the 80s, Kisumu had less than 200,000 people. It is mentioned that we could be doing about 700,000 now. But those are conservative figures, could be more. But we still have very many people who come to the city in the morning and leave in the evening. Part of the reason why this happens is that there's no adequate housing within the city. But even within the city itself, about 60% of the population is actually living in the slums. As he has mentioned, there are slums without water, proper water supply, without sanitation, without solid waste management programs, without children's playgrounds, without access roads, without proper electricity supply. And so in terms of proper and adequate housing, we do not have. We don't have a sufficient supply. And the housing that is coming up may not be affordable to the common man. So that, people will tell you that, but National Housing is putting up houses around Kibuye. But how many of the residents of Kisumu can actually afford that? If you look at the average income of the people of Kisumu, actually, if you do a census of those housing, you'll find that there are people living in Nairobi who have bought those houses. And therefore, they will rent them out at rates that are not affordable to the people of Kisumu. I think, and therefore, it is my view that the city management should be encouraged, that they should consider housing as a human rights issue. It's actually a rights issue under Article 43 of the Constitution. And they should not just be issuing notices without considering the fact that as a state agency, they have the primary role to ensure that there's housing. We are not asking them to build houses for people, but it is upon the city to put up policies and to develop interest through which the people themselves or investors could put up affordable housing. And then they have the responsibility to put up infrastructure. Until then, you cannot tell people to stop putting up shacks. You are not going to tell the people of Ondie, Karina, to stop constructing Mabati structures, because those houses were allocated to those families in the 1960s. Probably when the people who allocated those houses were single. They got married, they got children, their children grew up and got married there. And so right now it is the grandchildren living in the houses that were allocated to their grandfathers. And there could be 10 grandchildren. They are all married. They all have children. They want to share this space. There is no alternative space for them to go. So what do? They construct a Mabati structure outside. The alternative is that they'll be living in the streets. So I think the city management must look at this thing more comprehensively and consult with the people to come up with innovative ways of ensuring that our people are able to access affordable housing. Before that, I think the notices are premature, and I think the notices are actually a violation of the rights of the people to housing. You cannot remove those people from those structures unless you give them alternatives of where they're going to, and those alternatives that they can afford and that would be adequate.
I would like to add maybe just some impetus on what everybody has been saying. Being a resident of Kisumu 9 years, I wasn't born and bred here, but I found home in Kisumu. I will reiterate that again. And I've experienced some of the housing issues and concerns that probably we are talking about, and maybe majority of the Kisumu people are actually experiencing. And from affordability of housing to to even enough housing. We cannot talk about affordable housing while in itself we don't even have enough houses in Kisumu, because to me that is the greatest challenge. We have houses, but I wouldn't call them houses. And just as Maxwell had said, when you're talking about a house, you need to look at it from different angles. You need to look at it from access. Do I have roads? Do I have sanitation? Do I have water? Do I have probably a way of you disposing my waste and everything? And I see this is a major concern in Kisumu. And we have, I think, experienced and have seen, we have a lot of, I don't want to say haphazard settlements or developments, but we have a lot of, the city is actually surrounded by a lot of informal settlements. I do want to even say informal settlement. That will, I think, will be an insult to the dwellers and residents of those places. But we have, because we have challenge in housing, most of us end up putting up structures that probably might not meet standards of housing, and also probably because of our residential areas and surrounding or estates have also not really been well defined and designed and structured. So it becomes a challenge for everybody. And the challenges are always seen by some of the issues and some of the ills that our societies have been experiencing over the years. And even just what Nyamori was talking about, affordable houses. I was just reading an article that the governor was talking about plan to put up 2,000 affordable houses in conjunction with the national government by end of 2019. We are in 2020. I have not seen even a simple roadwork leading to somewhere in that regard. So we have a challenge, and I think housing is quite a challenge. And I think the sooner we crack our heads around it and wrap our heads around it, the better for everybody, because we'll end up having a lot of ills and social ills coming in because of inadequacy of housing. That's how I want to talk about it, inadequate housing.
Nyamori talked about affordable housing. I want to try also just play the devil's advocate kidogo. What is driving the cost of housing in Kisumu? Is it that we are not using locally available material? Is it demand and supply? What is actually driving the cost of affordable? What is actually driving this cost up higher? Because you see, at the end of the day, mwenye ako huko chini hataki kujali. Yeye anataka kuwe na nyumba mzuri, mahali anaweza ishi, si ndio? That is the general discourse of everybody else who is living within Kisumu County.
I wanted to try and answer maybe the question of what's driving the cost. For me, I feel the market has been left for willing buyer, willing seller sort of aspect. It doesn't consider how you construct your house, who the tenant will be, or where he will come from. It's on how much revenue, income to investment that you will, return to investment that you will make. So my take is that they need to come up with a way of maybe measuring the plinth area so that we know if maybe 10 square kilometers is roughly this much of a price. When the market is left for willing buyer, willing seller, people will construct houses that a 3-bedroom can be a 1-bedroom house for the other person. It doesn't depend on what is the size of that 3-bedroom house or what is the size of that 2-bedroom house. It can be just maybe 4 square kilometers, and then the other one is also maybe 3, the other one is 2, but then it'll be like, this is a 3-bedroom house, it will cost 45,000 shillings. See, it's a buyer and a seller. But then when the plinth area will now be defined, maybe in the policy, so that we say that if you want to rent a house, then this much of plinth area is this much of amount to get. Okay. Then that can also help on driving the cost a little bit lower. Thank you. Yes.
There's something you're saying. Is it green area or
plinth area?
Plinth area.
The area that is developed.
Elaborate that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. When you go for approval of your development approval process, you take your drawing to the physical planner, and then they check this building that we want to come up with. What area does it measure? The plinth area considers the area that is going to be constructed, the area that all the foundation is going to pick up, and then it's measured according to the number of floors that you will have. So if you have 2 floors, then it will be measured by 2. The first floor and then the second floor. It's just that area that the construction is going to take. That's the plinth area. So if you come up with a design whereby if it is 10 square kilometers of that plinth area, if it is like maybe a bed-sitter or a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, then we'll roughly know for a square kilometers or a square meter of maybe house, this is the sum that you need to charge. And now there's also this challenge that I think we've not touched on it. You know, when you talk on housing, there's residential housing, and then there's the commercial housing. So I don't know which one we really focus on. Is it the residential part of it or the commercial part of it for trade? Thank you.
And bring in the aspect of participation. That even as we are setting standards, whose standards? Decided by who, serving who. Okay? And culture, I think you raised the issue of cultural adequacy. It's critical here. Because, for instance, if you're putting up a building for the Asian community, they would, be very comfortable in you putting up a house with 6 or 7 bedrooms because they all stay together. Okay? And so the parents, you and your children and the in-laws, they would be, but in my culture, I am expected to move away from my parents after a while. So, and my child will have to move away from me, and so on and so forth. Yes. And therefore, in defining the adequate housing for the Asian community, it would be a very different standard from adequate housing for other communities. So I think that is critical. And I saw something, I think we have seen it in Nairobi, where the government has even moved and put up, huge structures, and after a while they are vacant, or the people who are supposed to be occupying them have moved and put up shacks next. I attended a conference on housing in Addis Ababa. Then we were taken to go and look at the huge government projects, housing projects that the government of Ethiopia had put up, and they were really huge. That would accommodate tens of thousands of people who are living in their slums. And then, that was a military government. So what would happen is that after they put up those structures, then they would sweep the slums clean and order these people to move into the built structures. So after a while, you would find that every new government project with thousands of housing had a shack coming up just next to it. Okay? So we went to try and inquire what was happening. Who are these people living in the shacks? We found that most of them are the people who had been allocated government structures. Okay? When we interviewed them, they told us, but who told the government that I need to sleep in a 3-bedroomed house? Who told the government that I need electricity? Who told the government that I need, you'll excuse my language, some said, who told the government that I need to shit in the house? What I need is a job. When I have a job, then I will choose whether I need a single bedroom, whether a 2-bedroom, whether I need electricity or not. My income will define. So probably, as we are discussing the housing issue in Kisumu, the government needs to discuss the demand side of housing. Then once the demand side of housing is sorted out, there would be supply. There would be, developers and banks and so on that would finance putting up all those structures. One of the problems, the issues why the housing sector is not developing in Kisumu is that there's no what would I call? There's no, I think I would call it adequate demand. There is demand, yes, but then the people who are demanding those houses are not able to afford to pay for those houses, either as tenants or as homeowners. So with that, investors will not come to. So I would expect the city management and the county government and the national government to come together and develop a plan to create employment and to drive investment into Kisumu. When we have investment and that would create employment and generate income, then people will demand for housing. When people demand for housing, then investors will automatically stop putting up structures. That because you can't explain why Nairobi has oversupply of housing, but the third largest city in the country has no housing. Okay, you could even for the middle class that has income, you could look for apartments where the single or just married couples could stay in. Because it's a problem, and it's a problem because even those few people who can afford, they're very few. So it does not make economic sense for an investor to put up 100 units of one-bedroomed houses. So I think the economic aspect needs to be sorted out.
I started by talking about policy framework.
Yes.
And I want to insist that without a national policy framework that drives affordability of housing in Kenya, we won't go far. In our challenges in Lumba Estate as the secretary of the estate, I did a lot of studies, and I realized that where Kenya is, and I want to use Kisumu as a microcosm, as a sample of the housing challenge that's taking place all over the country. I studied New York, and we are where New York was in 1943.
Yeah.
It forced New York to come up with a city housing board that looked at everything we are talking about, from affordability to accessibility to inherited housing to protected tenancy. And that's what we lack today, because that is going to be embedded in a national housing policy. We do not have, Kenya doesn't have. For example, in my research, when I was petitioning the parliament, both parliaments, to come up with the national housing policy, I realized that we have over 12 acts or regulations on housing that are put together in order for us to have houses. We have a lawyer with us that will agree with me that in order for you to put up a house in a manner that you will be safe in it as an owner and as a landlord, we have a myriad of regulations and laws and other things that then will be used to defend one of you who crosses the other path. For example, we have the Housing Act of 1953. This was from the British. Okay, Chapter 11, revised edition. That's what we refer to. And then it was again revised in 2012 and 2015. Sessional paper number 33 of 2004 on national housing policy for Kenya. But really not a standalone national housing policy. Then we have the Housing Bill of 2014 and the Housing Amendment Bill of 2017. Now, why were these ones coming up? There are so many. They're coming up because the political players know that there is money in the housing market. So what do? They come up with schemes and policies, small policies and rules and regulations that then gives them an upper hand when they want to invest. For example, Group Africa. Group Africa is an investment entity in Nairobi, but they had come here to invest around Riyadh. What did they want to put up? Housing. They don't want to put affordable housing, just housing. But now, in conclusion, I want to say this. Let's go to Kabrini, what we now call Polyview Estate, and talking to what he was saying. The plots on which those huge flats were constructed were allocated to the owners, and at I think less than 50,000. Okay, but to get a house there, even to get a single room, you pay 15 to 20,000. So it takes less than 1 year for the owner of the plot to whom it was allocated to get the amount. Then it takes less than 7 years. In construction and building, it takes 7 years for you to get back to start getting earning income from your house. But in Kisumu, because of lack of a guiding national housing policy, which should be borrowed by the county government, you allocated land, you put up a house in a zoned area like Polyview, which is part of Kalolini Sharmoe ward where I come from, which is basically slum. Then you expect someone to pay 30,000, 40,000, up to 50,000. So that is the problem. I'm answering your question directly. What is driving an affordability? I hope I've answered briefly.
This thing we have now adopted to be called the affordable housing. I think it's a first. It's a first because how affordable is affordable? No, even in Nairobi. How affordable is affordable? Look at KNBS, who is a middle class. A middle class, anyone who spends 24,000 and above, till about 120,000. That's a middle class. Who spends 24,000 in anyone who earns 30, and in average income, a medium income in Nairobi is 30,000. That person, he's illustrated that you should not spend more than 30%, 30% income. It means if my salary is 30K, that's a median salary, I should not spend more than 10,000. Now, is there a good house that you can get for less than 10,000 and you call it affordable housing? Most investments, I'm a capitalist by nature, but I in housing, I differ. For me personally, even as Wakili, which I agree with this point, that housing sort of is a subset of your income, what you get. So if we create opportunities and income, we'll have choices to spend. And I'll have choice whether to go live in a mansion in Nyahera and come back to Toronto. Those are all choices. But I support a policy whereby, in regards to what you asked when the notices were given, fine, we want to, there is a plan that the city has. We want to build apartments, 10 floor apartments or 8 floor apartments. As we plan, what is what criteria are we using? In most of these criteria, governments want to do an MOU with a private institution. Now, when they make those houses for someone living in Arena or Makasemu, that house, he pays currently 4K. When this investor construct the house, the cost of the rent is going to be 15 or 20K. It means this guy will not have to stay in this town. Yeah. He's going to live in. Personally, it's a radical solution. But I want, if I'm the governor today, I can advocate between 300 to 400 million in real locus, what you call locus housing. Okay. Let's construct a housing, not for profit, but as a right to. Like we have to recognize that there are classes in the city, and people need to be housed. So I can partner with maybe NHC, and out of my budget, out of area 400 million, to do locus houses, the ones on Jogo Road, where people, it can be 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom, but the rent is going to be 5K. Okay. Yes.
Now, there's something Nyamori touched on. Yeah. He talked about public participation. When some of these notices are issued out, do people in those areas get involved? Or it's just a declaration from the city manager and the city board that stalls or shops or kiosks that are within estates need to go, or burial places that are within the city and the city suburbs also need to go? Where, Nyamori, niambie, at times, housing is a very technical topic, but irudishe kwa ground. Make us understand why the city feels like it needs to give out instructions to residents of Kisumu without public participation. Yes.
My view is that the city management sometimes think that they own the city. The city doesn't belong to the city manager. It doesn't belong to the board. It doesn't belong to the governor or to the MCA. This city belongs to those residents, these people who are doing, businesses. And this includes both the formal and the informal sector business players. It includes those who are in the formal estates and those who are in the informal estates. And therefore, the direction that the city takes needs to be a direction that fulfills the needs and the aspirations of these people, and that, these people can afford in the long run. So that, when you want to make policies on housing, you need to consult these people and ask, what is it that they want? Okay? And what is their priority? Okay, for instance, right now, I see the major paving of our roadsides, doing the curb road stones. Yeah, it makes the city look beautiful, but is that our priority? The CBD alone, the priority in the CBD is the drainage system. Okay, the CBD has no drainage system, so that if if you're caught by rain along Ogigodinga streets, you will be walking. Before COVID, I would be attending classes at the University of Nairobi, and anytime it rains, I would walk almost, up to half my leg in water. Okay, and that is all over the city. So that if we had 1 billion shillings or 3 billion shillings that I'm being told they have, I would have prioritized expanding our drainage system. But what are they doing? They're making beautiful walkways, which will be flooded. In the process of making these beautiful walkways, they have thrown out the informal sector players. Where are these people going to? So that if you are saying that, yes, you want to improve on Diek and Makasembo and Lumumba and so on and so forth, the question is, have you consulted this person to know, one, whether they need better housing? Two, what are the kind of this better housing that they need? Three, once you put up those housing, will they afford the new housing? If they have been paying 2,000 shillings a month, and you put up housing that would cost 13,000, but the guy's income is 20,000, okay? He still needs to take children to school, he needs to pay electricity, he needs to buy food, he needs to meet healthcare. Will he still be able to stay there, or will he be moved to the next slum so that somebody else who can afford takes over his house? Okay, so as we make all this urban planning, we must look at the challenge that urban gentrification has faced all over the world, and try as much as possible to protect the interests of the poor. I have had the chance to lead stakeholder consultation in a number of development projects in this town. The latest was the Kisumu Urban Project. And I remember when, for instance, we went to places like in Nyalenda and Banani, and we wanted to put up roads. Yes, they need roads, but that is the only land that he owns. Okay? And the Lord is going to eat into his land. And the government is telling them that, we need to break up, you need to bring down your building because we are putting up a road, but we cannot afford to compensate you. Where are you driving this guy to? So we need to have the city management, try to look at these things from the eyes of the residents themselves, and especially the poor and the vulnerable. Okay? And even as we make those decisions, we need to also find out how would it affect both men and women. Okay? Because it affect, if you go to Kaloleni, for instance, if you make a decision in a meeting, dominated by men, you'd find that those families are women-led families. Okay? And then how is it going to affect the people with the disability? So that we ensure that even as we make houses, the designs would also include people with disability, or they're going to be driven out such that this infrastructure that is going to be put up are infrastructure that they cannot be able to access and afford. Yeah.
Okay, I think, thank you, Joshua. And I also wanted to comment on his comments before I react on the current one. First thing, we have to know that housing is a default function. We should not look at it in terms of national. So he talked about national policy and maybe county policy. I want to assure him there's a housing policy, Kenya National Housing Policy, but it's in a draft stage. So maybe that's why he hasn't had a look at it. It's being discussed, but it hasn't been generated such that people can also look into it. And then something nice also, Kisumu has a Kisumu County Housing Policy. And that, I think, is in place also. And within this Kisumu housing policy, there are ways in which Kisumu County wants to engage people on coming up with better housing for Kisumu. And one component that I'm really proud of that also I did push, and plus others, was having an independent fund that can be given to residents to improve their housing. The only thing is that it has not been institutionalized onto how do we have this independent fund, how will it operate, and how much will we be giving these persons who are willing to improve their houses. So when yes, please. Yeah.
What is this obsession with wanting to do flats or pulling down the existing units? And why must we just do the flats on that land? In our planning, have we really narrowed up that we can't do flats in Kibos or Nyamasaria? Why must we do it in Arena or Makasembo? Can we just sell those houses to those places and we go look for other places? I mean, there's no lack of land.
Thank you very much. There is no lack of land, but there's lack of ownership of land. It depends on where do you own that land that you want to develop. So where does Kisumu County own the land that they want to develop? They have to only use the land that they have ownership of. They cannot just go to a land that they don't have ownership of. Hence, that's what. Wait a minute. There is compulsory acquisition, but then there's also laws on how to acquire that land. You have to go via the National Land Commission way, because National Land Commission is what acquires land for the county government and national government. The county cannot go in, it has to go via that institution. So currently, I believe they are using the Arwing Skodek, Lumumba, because they feel this is what they can have ownership of. And also another thing, land does not increase. Land is the way it is. It's standard. So if it is standard, how can we make multiple person have this ownership of this small land? That's why they're coming up with the apartments. And the apartments way, it's whereby now there is new way of owning property, whereby you don't own the land, but now own the property as a result. That is what they are maybe trying to come up with, which they have not maybe done. But the problem is that the county is not making these things public. They're not having these public sensitization meetings, which to me, I feel like it should be regularly, maybe weekly sensitization meetings in these contentious places that they want to come up with these buildings. Because my fear is that, yes, people really need to improve their houses. They agree these houses need to be improved, but how should they be improved? Can it be a way whereby we have a private partnership sort of a deal, whereby you don't have to drive me, but me, myself, I know my tenants. Why don't we agree, come up with a mutual agreement such that I now am getting the loan from the county, but then I'll stand as me, an individual person, paying back the county. In my various maybe workshops within Kisumu County, people are willing to construct their own housing. Yeah. The challenge is that the planning approval fees, they see that it's way too high. How can it be reduced for them to find like an equal footing? Because before you even construct, you know, there are these approval things, from EID to change of use document to NEMA permits and such like. They're really too high. You find someone has maybe 200,000, he just wants to do a renovation. He has to get approval for that. The 200,000 will only go to paying the fees. But now making the building will also be a different thing. So when you come into participation that you asked, it's really key for people to participate so that they also get to know where should we develop much further. And on this, I'm really happy that right now we usually have this before the budget making process. We have the public participations. Yeah. This is where people also give their views. An interesting bit is that most residents usually fear to go and give their views on this part. And then later, they'll say that we did not need this. We wanted this other one. But remember that the government here is also changing. If maybe today we prioritize a road, it will take maybe a year or so for the road to be implemented. By the time the road is being implemented, we also have other changes that might have occurred that maybe it's not really pressing at that moment when we gave the option of a road. Okay. So this should also be considered. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
I'm hearing that we have a Kisumu County housing policy that is actually working. It's there. Is it working?
So I was just reading some write-up where the governor was talking about the port. So he said the county, through the support of KISIP and the World Bank, has prepared the housing policy. The policy recommends the establishment of the county housing fund. I don't know if it's what you're talking about, and recognition of rural housing as the biggest component in county interventions. Then it continues, we will implement these recommendations by enacting the necessary legislation and making budgetary provisions for a concrete plan to develop housing facilities. So what I think is, in as much as we have the policy, but I don't think it's still implementable because we don't have requisite legislation to actually actualize it. So I think that is the challenge. But now what will that one take? Because it's a lacuna that is existing.
You see, when you say that you are developing a rural sector-oriented housing policy, okay, then it means that you want to, develop a policy that will encourage and probably also regulate the kind of housing in the villages. When you come to my village, if I'm still living in my father's compound, it is defined how we can say that there is something called malo, there's something called mualo. Okay? So that whatever size of the land we have, this can build, and I am expected to build on the lower side. And once I build there, culture then expects me to move out of that house after certain years to another. So if you develop a policy that would actually encourage me to put up a permanent building here, but then it is going to conflict with culture that is pushing me out to go and build another home. There is that policy itself would drive the prices of land, because then it would drive investment into the rural areas. Once it drives the investment, the prices of land, it therefore means that even accessing land to put up new homes is are not afforded. The question then is, if we develop a policy without adequate participation, without listening to the needs of these people, without defining how we are going to encourage them to change culture, then it would be conflict of interest. We are going to get to a point where, the economic and regulatory imperatives are in conflict with culture. Okay? Then at that point, we are going to be stuck with a problem that the law can solve, the regulations can solve it, and culture is also stuck because we cannot, economic imperatives and legal imperatives cannot allow us to advance cultural. So I am still thinking that the city and the county have a responsibility. Whatever level their draft policy is, they need to take it back to the people, have it discussed adequately, have it incorporate culture, and or have it also incorporate mechanisms for changing of cultural requirements, so that we are actually able to develop policies that can be implemented. Otherwise, it can, the one of the problems, I have had an opportunity, being a law student and also being an economic student and having an interest in development, I have been looking at how county governments are developing policies. And what is basically happening is that county governments are picking drafts from cities that are, that developed in the 1940s and 1930s, and trying to retrofit them into our context. It simply cannot work. It is important that we start writing from the first phrase in those regulations. We sit down as a people and say that we want a policy for housing. What kind of housing? Why the housing? And who are going to own these houses? How are they going to be? So that they are homegrown and local policies. Otherwise, we will have them. We have all policies for every sector, but they are unimplementable. So they are used by council as carries and a planning department to actually collect bribe from people, because you cannot meet the standards that they require. So the only way is to try and get the stamp, and to get the stamp you have to bribe them. Yeah. Yes.
You rightly mentioned city and county.
And county. Yes, that's another thing, because our county is not the city. We are in a unique situation where we have, unlike Nairobi and Mombasa, where the county is the city, so that whatever the decision the county makes or the city makes, they are one and the same thing. In our situation, we have a county assembly where we have, I think there are 14 MCAs representing the city, and then we have a total of 50 MCAs, a significant number of them representing the rural areas. And the needs of these areas are in conflict with each other. In my village, my interest is the area where my cows will graze. I want to be able to plant I have my shamba. And I want to be able to go to the local, we have a river next to our compound. I want to go fishing there without any hindrance, yes. And then when I come to the city, I'm being told that, oh, we have to create space for playground and at the expense of my cow and my goat. And exactly. So I think these are the things that we need to define, and the city board should be able to come up with policies that define our unique city. Our Kisumu is, I don't think there are many cities like Kisumu in the world. Our unique rural city, and try and create, a convergence between the rural life, because we also have a rural life that is not purely rural. All those people in the rural areas, because the economies of the rural areas have collapsed, they all come to the city in the morning and go back in the evening. Then now we have the towns being created. We will end up with about 5 of the satellite cities. How? Yes. How do we ensure that there is an economic and planning linkage between the satellite towns and the main city? And how do we ensure that these satellite towns have linkages with the hinterland, the villages around them, so that the villages feed the smaller cities, the smaller towns, and the smaller towns free pressure on the city, so that not everybody has to come. The people coming from around Ahero or around Maseno can find services around the areas. They don't need to run to the city for services. We will decongest the city, but is Ahero going to have housing? Is Maseno going to have housing? And what kind of housing? Now, if you tell me that you want to put, the idea is to put up apartments, are you going to put up apartments in Kombewa? And then if you put up apartments in Kombewa, if my parents own, fourth floor, and I'm on the third floor, are my parents allowed to have a bedroom on top of my bedroom? What are the cultural implications? And you might, I've had people arguing about the fact that, the mother-in-law came to visit them, and the mother-in-law cannot use the same bathroom and the same toilet. That how can I sit on the same toilet seat in which my mother-in-law sits? That is an abomination. Are we considering these things in the policy framework?
I want parting shots. What do you think is the way forward? Watu wa Kisumu wanataka affordable housing. Every Kenyan wants affordable housing. And that is the key. Is it easier to build? Is it easier to buy? There are so many questions residents of Kisumu generally have. Like, why is it that we only have 3 available options of building? It's either stone, brick, or mud. Are there other techniques? Why are they not being, if there are other techniques, why are they not being taught to us? Why are they not being used? Because you see, essentially, what we're saying is, there is no way we are going to achieve affordable housing without bringing on board some of these major aspects. Now, as a parting shot, kidogo tu mgusie, and try and make it as easy to understand as possible. Yes.
Housing as a sector is unique because in almost all sectors, banking, insurance, hospitality, it accommodates all the workers that work here. As a parting shot, in Kisumu currently, I think we're in a trajectory path. That's no doubt, and we'll continue to grow. Other industries will come. The next 5 or 4 years, we will grow. I think for the private sector, there's a challenge to kind of come and check what we can build to get more deficit. On the government side, more planning And I think government has a challenge on their houses or the houses that they own, how they can kind of accommodate everyone. Now, government has a right to, or they have a mandate to make sure that most people who are poor or can't afford living, they get affordable housing. So to the private sector, I believe there will be more potential for that. But to the government, I think they should find a way how they can accommodate everyone in the city. Everyone in the city. The poor, the rich, the city is ours. They deserve to be there. Yes.
Yes, there is a need. There is an urgent need for adequate and affordable housing. So my recommendation is open up the housing sector, a discussion on the housing sector. Let us talk about it, and then differentiate between different classes, different industries. For example, the fisher folk, for example, the teachers, for example, those in generally Juakali, their earning capabilities, and the fact that there is something that they can contribute towards the construction of houses that they can own. If we open this up in a manner that participation is constructive and meaningful and effective, then things will be well.
There's a study that was done in Kisumu that stated that Kisumu currently needs around 5,000 houses per annum against a supply of 500 housing. So meaning almost each year we have a down supply of around 4,500, and yet the urbanization is still continuing. So there'll be more persons. And my other thought is that for construction of housing, we also need to know of the fees and charges. That is, I would say it's really not into the public limelight. It's more towards the planning department that already knows those things. So the valuation role will be better, because I know Kisumu County was coming up with a valuation role that will guide people on what or how much is your land going to be charged when it is within the county boundary or the city boundary, so that it is made public also, and if possible, it should be within the ward or the assistant chief, the local administrations, and people can also access this information. And another thing on participation, I'll really say that there's need for more participation between the county and the public, or the county and the residents, on matters housing. There's more to be done on this part. And on other building materials, yes, there's need for other building materials, appropriate building materials and technology. I know there's the rammed earth that we can use. There's the interlocking bricks that we can use. And then there are also other various ways of maybe construction, even cardboard houses. So these should also be brought forth. Not forgetting the vernacular architecture that we used to, the mud and wattle or the mud and cow dung type of construction. There are beautiful houses made of mud within the cities and done perfectly well with cow dung, and people really can stay on them with grass tag. It only sees onto how do we now work so that we get a gain between the residents and the county government. But all in all, I think housing is one sector whereby everyone needs to work hand in hand, the government and the public, and come up with a public and private partnership in improving houses in Kisumu. Because even demolishing houses in Arguing, Skodek, Lumumba, Makasembo will not maybe feature well if the residents are not brought on board to see how do we relocate these persons who are affected by the project, and how do we come up with a plan, a solid plan that will help them maybe in the future to maybe have gainful information. I can't have a benchmark cost of affordable housing, because when now you talk of the benchmark, then you'll also bring on board the low-cost housing. Now, which houses can we say are low cost? And which ones can we say are affordable? And then there's this other point of social housing. Now you'll bring these definitions, which will also and make it hard. Thank you.
I want to add that the point I made, that we need to look at it as a business, and look at housing not as a standoff development that we want to bring to Kisumu, because it will fail. Because this very county that is saying that they want to, establish a fund, cannot even meet the basic expenses for its own running of its offices. So where is it going to get the money to establish a fund to put up housing? So we need to have a whole comprehensive county development that takes care of the city takes care of the 5 cities, and that is focused on the entire socio-economic development, so that one, we revive agriculture in the rural areas. Once we revive agriculture in the rural areas, we will reduce the number of young people coming to town to look for employment, and they will have income to put up housing in their villages. With that, we will have dealt with the issue that he was raising of rural housing. And then once we do that, we will then be able to supply raw materials and food to fire the manufacturing industry, and therefore attract manufacturing industry. And once we have the manufacturing industry, we will then, and with the improved infrastructure, for instance, the roads, the railway that is being worked on, the port, the commercial sector would rise. Once we have that, then there will be income in the hands of the people to attract the private sector to supply housing to the urban people. And once we do this, it's also important for the city, the county, and the city management to drive this investment through planning to move away from the city to go to this satellite town. People drive for 2 hours from Kitengela to come to the city center. And once we develop housing in Maseno, then the lecturers and students in Maseno don't have to stay in Kisumu. They will stay there. We will reduce pressure here. So this idea about bringing down Makasembo and bringing down Odiek and bringing down, before giving them alternative, I think is not the solution. We'd rather put up structures in Ahero, put up structures in Maseno, in Kombewa, that are culturally acceptable, but that would attract people there and also reduce the people coming to the city. And then with that, put up housing in Moroni. I am sure that there are very many people who would run away from the city once there are proper housing in Moroni, to stay within Moroni and come to the city only once a month. So I think the entire plan, the spatial and integrated plan, needs to be a plan that for the city, like Kisumu, we have developed, the city we have developed under KUP, we developed ISUD. But then that ISUD should be integrated with a whole county development plan, and that this plan should respond to the actual needs of the people. Once that is done, then the city and the county leadership, rather than issuing edicts that are unimplementable, they should actually go out and mobilize people to buy into these plans and start focusing their investment and their decisions on these plans, and then go out of the city to look for investors and to look for financiers to come and help the people implement these plans.
My parting shot probably would be in two regards. One of them would be we should have an all-inclusive engagement around the housing policy. If we have this housing policy, I don't know how inclusive it was in its design in the first place. So I think we have an opportunity now, because we are still working on the regulations around it, probably from the assembly and all policymakers involved. I would want this to be taken to the next level, where let's bring in each and every stakeholder, from the private sector to residents, to the county, to leadership, and everybody who is involved. Let's have a roundtable and rethink this policy, because when we are making this policy, we are not making it for today. Maybe some people might think it is for today or to serve a purpose, but let's look at it in terms, we're building a policy for Kisumu in 2120, 100 years from today. Let's build the policy for the future. And that brings me to my second point, where was building from our last week's discussion when you're talking about Kisumu and its future cities. We have, I think, touched a little bit on the towns that have been that Kisumu now has, the 2 new towns plus the 3 new ones that will be coming in. As we develop this housing policy, let's also look at how do we visualize Ahero town to be in 2100? What opportunities are we seeing? What land use changes are we seeing? Are we going to have the rice schemes over there? Are we going to have apartments in the rice belt? Or are we going to have industries? Because that will inform the real estate of Kisumu then, and that comes with a housing challenge if we cannot start thinking about Kisumu of the future. So that will be my parting shot, so that we look at doing a housing policy for the future, not just for today or just to fill the gap of the challenges you're facing now. Let's start to think around what will be the challenges of the future and build a policy based around that as we deal with the current nightmare that we have as a city. Thank you.
It was nice having you, having real discussions on real issues affecting people of Kisumu and their housing issues. Two key things I have taken out of the discussions. Number one, public participation. I think we can't run away from that. Effective public participation. And the second thing, the benchmark about affordable housing. What is the benchmark in Kisumu? Because Kisumu is different from Nairobi. The factors that affect Kisumu and the different other cities are different. So the benchmark on affordable housing in Kisumu, what is it? What is the policy saying about it? So those are, I think, are the two main issues that I think are great highlights that I've actually picked from this conversation. It was wonderful having you. If you want to be part of this conversation, kindly contact us. Everything else will be put on screen. Asanteni sana.